Imagine you are a 22-year-old Marine. You are sitting in the belly of an amphibious assault ship somewhere in the Persian Gulf. It is hot, it is loud, and somewhere above the waterline, on a deck you cannot see, aircraft are already in the air. You have been told very little, but you know the name of the operation. You know where you are headed, and somewhere in the back of your mind, in the place where soldiers store the things they do not say out loud, you know that what is about to happen has never been attempted before. Not like this. Not against a country like this. This is not a story about a war that happened in the past. This is a story about a war that military planners, historians, and strategists have spent decades trying to prevent. It is a story about what happens when the last line is crossed, when airstrikes are no longer enough, when diplomatic ultimatums expire, when a president looks at his generals and says the words that change everything. Send them in. Welcome to the scenario every Pentagon war game has quietly run and quietly buried. What happens if the United States launches a ground invasion of Iran? Before we can understand what a ground invasion would look like, we have to understand the world it would be launched into. Because this is not a hypothetical from 20 years ago. This is happening now. As of the spring of 2026, the United States and Israel are already at war with Iran. Operation Epic Fury, the name the Pentagon gave to its joint strikes launched on February 28, 2026, has already changed the Middle East in ways that will take decades to fully understand. In the first 12 hours alone, nearly 900 strikes hit Iranian soil. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, the man who had guided the Islamic Republic for over 3 decades, was killed in the opening salvo. Iranian air defenses, already badly damaged by Israeli strikes in the 12-day war of June 2025, crumbled faster than anyone publicly admitted they would. And yet, Iran did not collapse. Iran did not surrender. It did not ask for terms. It launched hundreds of ballistic missiles across the region. It sent waves of drones into the UAE, into Kuwait, into Bahrain. It hit Gulf oil refineries. It damaged an American AWACS surveillance aircraft at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia. It shot down 2 United States military jets. And then, in a move that has brought the entire global economy to the edge of a cliff, it closed the Strait of Hormuz. 20% of the world's daily oil supply, gone. 150 cargo ships, stranded. And on April 4th, 2026, with a presidential deadline set to expire in less than 48 hours, the question everyone on Earth is asking is no longer whether the war will escalate. The question is how far. That is where our story begins. To understand what a ground invasion would mean, you have to understand something that most news coverage glosses over entirely. Airstrikes, no matter how precise, no matter how overwhelming, cannot hold territory. They cannot force a regime to sign a document. They cannot govern a population of 85 million people. They cannot stand at a border crossing and say, "This ends here." Only soldiers can do that. Only boots on the ground. And the moment you put boots on the ground in Iran, the moment that Marine in the belly of that ship steps onto Iranian soil, you are no longer fighting a war with a beginning, a middle, and an end that you can plan for. You are stepping into the oldest military trap in human history. You are invading Persia. Let's pause on that for a moment. Because the land that is today called Iran has been one of the most consequential military theaters on Earth for over 2,500 years. Alexander the Great marched through it. The Roman legions of Marcus Crassus were annihilated at Carrhae by Parthian forces using exactly the kind of asymmetric, decentralized, hit-and-run tactics that modern Iran has studied and perfected. The British Empire tried to control it and could not. The Soviet Union occupied its northern regions during World War II and left a legacy of suspicion that has never fully healed. And in the 1980s, Saddam Hussein, with American backing, with chemical weapons, with every conventional military advantage, fought Iran for 8 years and could not break it. Iran has never, in recorded history, been successfully conquered and pacified by a foreign power. That is not mythology. That is the military record. And the men and women who run the United States Central Command know it better than anyone. So here is how the ground invasion scenario actually unfolds. Here's what the war games look like when you run them honestly. The decision to commit ground troops would not come out of nowhere. It would come after weeks, possibly months, of air campaign that achieves less than it promised. Imagine the airstrikes have continued past April 6th. The Strait of Hormuz is still partially blocked. Iranian missile launches, though degraded, have not stopped. The Iranian regime, now under the leadership of Mojtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader's son, elected to replace his father in the chaos following the opening strikes, has shown no sign of negotiating. Oil prices are at record highs. The global economy is bleeding. American allies in the Gulf are taking casualties. And somewhere in Washington, the argument that has been building for weeks finally wins. We cannot finish this from the air. We have to go in. The operational plan would almost certainly begin not with a single massive invasion force, but with a series of what the military calls shaping operations. Special Operations Forces, Delta Force, SEAL teams, Army Rangers would be inserted into Iran before any conventional forces arrive. Their job is to neutralize air defense remnants, mark targets, establish communication networks with any internal resistance groups, and if possible, make contact with Iranian military officers who might be willing to defect or stand down. This phase would likely begin weeks before any public announcement, in the darkness and silence that precedes all major military campaigns. Then comes the air corridor. Before a single armored vehicle rolls onto Iranian territory, the U.S. Air Force would need to establish what planners call a permissive environment, a battle space where American aircraft can operate without serious threat of being shot down. This sounds straightforward. It is not. Iran's air defense network, even after months of strikes, is layered and redundant. It is not a single system you can switch off. It is a web of Russian-built S-300 batteries, domestically produced Bavar 373 missiles, short-range Tor systems, and thousands of mobile anti-aircraft units that can be moved, hidden, and reactivated, eliminating it completely, to the point where ground forces can operate safely, would require a sustained air campaign of extraordinary intensity. And every day that campaign continues, Iranian engineers are repairing, relocating, and improvising. But let us say it works. Let us say the air corridor opens. Let us say the president gives the order, the world holds its breath, and the first elements of the United States Army and Marine Corps cross into Iran. Where do they cross? This is one of the first things that makes Iran categorically different from every other U.S. military campaign of the modern era. Iraq, in 2003, was entered from Kuwait in the south, with a relatively flat, open desert terrain that favored American armor and air support. Afghanistan was entered through mountain passes and air bases, with a counterinsurgency model that prioritized population centers. Iran is something else entirely. It is a country the size of Alaska, with a population of 85 million people, with mountain ranges that would make Afghan topography look gentle by comparison. The Zagros Mountains run like a spine through the west of the country. The Alborz Range forms a wall north of Tehran. The terrain is not just difficult, it is in multiple regions, nearly impassable for heavy armored vehicles. The most likely entry point for a conventional ground force would be from the south, from the Persian Gulf Coast, through Khuzestan province. This is where most of Iran's oil infrastructure sits. It is also where Iran has been preparing defenses for decades. Iranian military doctrine, shaped by the lessons of the Iran-Iraq War, has always anticipated a southern invasion. The Revolutionary Guard has spent years fortifying the approaches to major cities, pre-positioning weapons caches, training local militias, and building the kind of layered urban defense that transforms cities like Stalingrad and Fallujah into nightmares for attacking forces. Now here is the part of the scenario that keeps American generals awake at night. Iran does not fight like a conventional army. It never has. Not since the 1980s taught it that conventional warfare against a better-equipped enemy is a losing strategy. What Iran has built over the past 40 years is what military theorists call an asymmetric, multi-domain deterrent, which is a technical way of saying Iran has spent decades designing a defense specifically tailored to defeat the way the United States fights wars. Think about what that means in practice. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, has a ground force of over 150,000 soldiers. But those soldiers are only the beginning. Behind them are the Basij, a paramilitary volunteer force that in wartime can mobilize somewhere between 1 and 3 million fighters. These are not professional soldiers in the Western sense, but they are motivated. They know the terrain, they know the cities, and they have been trained in the kind of block-by-block, street-by-street defensive warfare that makes urban combat the most costly form of military engagement that exists. The ratio of attacking to defending forces required to clear a fortified city is historically around 3 to 1. For a city the size of Tehran, a metropolitan area of 15 million people, the numbers become almost incomprehensible. And then there are the tunnels. This is the detail that does not make it into most news coverage, but that every serious military analyst understands is central to the Iran problem. Over decades, Iran has constructed an extraordinary underground military network. Not just a few bunkers, an entire parallel military architecture buried beneath its mountains and cities. Underground airbases with runways carved into rock, hardened command and control centers at depths that the United States' most powerful conventional bombs, including the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator used against Fordow in 2025, struggle to guarantee destroying. Underground missile production facilities, underground fuel depots, underground hospitals, a shadow military infrastructure designed to survive a sustained air campaign and allow Iranian forces to continue fighting long after the surface has been devastated. The United States found a version of this in North Korea. It has seen it in Hezbollah's tunnel networks in Lebanon. But in Iran, the scale is categorically larger. American intelligence estimates suggest Iran has hundreds of kilometers of hardened underground infrastructure. When airstrikes pound the surface, the war does not end. It goes underground, and when the ground invasion comes, it reemerges. Let us go back to our timeline. Day 1 of the ground campaign. American forces have crossed into Khuzestan. The initial advance is faster than expected. Iran's conventional forces, battered by months of airstrikes, cannot hold a linear front against American armor and close air support. The early news coverage looks positive. Maps show arrows moving north. Pentagon briefings are cautiously optimistic. But this is the pattern that history repeats over and over again. The initial invasion is never the hard part. On day 2, the nature of the war begins to change. American supply convoys moving north along Highway 7 start taking fire from positions that are not on any map. Small IRGC units that have dispersed into villages, into farms, into the marshlands of the Shad al-Arab. Improvised explosive devices, the same weapons that killed and maimed thousands of American soldiers in Iraq, begin appearing on roads. Drone swarms, cheap and expendable and launched by units that have no air force to shoot them down, begin harassing American positions. Not enough to stop the advance, enough to slow it, enough to kill. And in modern war, every American soldier killed is a political cost that accumulates. On day 3, something happens that changes the entire regional picture. Iran's proxy network activates. This is the dimension of the Iran problem that is hardest to convey in a short news segment, but that strategists have been warning about for years. Iran does not fight its wars alone. Over 4 decades, it has constructed what is perhaps the most sophisticated regional proxy alliance in modern military history. Hezbollah in Lebanon, even weakened by Israel's 2024 campaign, retains tens of thousands of rockets and fighters. The Popular Mobilization Forces, the Iranian-backed militias in Iraq, number over 100,000 fighters and sit right next to the supply lines any U.S. force operating in western Iran would depend on. The Houthis in Yemen, who have already entered this war, control the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the other major maritime choke point for global trade. And scattered across Syria, across the Palestinian territories, across Bahrain and Kuwait, are networks of sleeper cells, logistics nodes, and weapons caches that have been pre-positioned precisely for this moment. When the ground invasion begins, every one of these networks receives the same message, not from a central command that can be decapitated, from a decentralized system of communication built to survive exactly the kind of leadership strike that killed Khamenei. The message is simple. Now, American bases in Iraq begin taking rocket fire. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad goes into lockdown. In Lebanon, Hezbollah launches its largest rocket barrage in years. Not at American forces directly, but at Israeli cities, forcing Israel to divert resources and attention. In the Red Sea, Houthi attacks on commercial shipping intensify, further straining the global supply chain. And in the Persian Gulf, Iranian fast attack boats, small, cheap, and numerous, begins swarming the sea lanes in the pattern that U.S. Navy planners call the anti-access swarm, designed not to defeat American warships, but to complicate their operations, to force them to spend missiles and attention in every direction at once. The United States has the most powerful military in the history of human civilization. That is not in doubt. But military power is not infinite. It operates within constraints of logistics, of geography, of political will, of time. And what Iran's strategy is designed to do is not to defeat American power directly. It is to exhaust it, to stretch it, to multiply the cost in lives, in treasure, in domestic political support, until the calculation back in Washington changes. This is what asymmetric warfare means in practice. It is not about winning battles. It is about making battles so costly that the other side eventually decides they do not want to fight anymore. By the end of the first week, the American force in Khuzestan has secured the provincial capital of Awaz, a city of over 1 million people. The fighting has been intense. U.S. casualties are in the dozens. Iranian civilian casualties, despite enormous efforts to minimize them, are in the hundreds. The images coming out of Iranian cities, residential buildings struck by debris, hospitals overwhelmed, families in flight, are beginning to do something that military planners cannot fully account for. They are changing the political climate in countries that matter. In France, in Germany, in Turkey, in India, every government that had stayed quiet during the air campaign is now facing public pressure to speak out. The United Nations Security Council is convening an emergency session. And in Tehran, in the underground command center where Leader Khamenei and the surviving leadership of the Islamic Republic are directing the war, the strategic calculus is shifting. A ground invasion does not bring Iran closer to capitulation. It gives the regime something it desperately needs: a unifying enemy. This is the paradox that haunts every scenario for military intervention in Iran. The Islamic Republic, by 2026, is a regime that had lost enormous legitimacy with its own people. The January 2026 protests, the largest since the revolution itself, demonstrated that millions of Iranians were willing to risk their lives to demand change. The economy had collapsed. The currency had cratered. The government had responded with mass killings that shocked the world. There was, for the first time in a generation, a genuine question of whether the regime could survive its own population. And then the bombs fell, and something very old and very deep inside Iranian national identity woke up. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah, the man the United States had long hoped might lead a post-Islamic Republic Iran, said it plainly. He opposed the bombing, not because he supported the regime, but because he understood that the Iranian people, no matter how bitterly they opposed their government, would not accept being liberated at the cost of their homes, their children, and their 2,500-year national heritage. The moment American soldiers are on Iranian soil, the internal opposition to the regime does not rise up. It goes quiet, because in the presence of a foreign invader, national identity trumps political grievance. Every time, in every culture, throughout all of history, the regime, which had been struggling for survival weeks earlier, now has a rallying point. Foreign aggression, the thing that Iranians from every political background, from every generation, from the secular and the religious, from the poor and the educated, can unite around. The war does not break the Islamic Republic. It saves it. Now let us zoom out, because the ground invasion of Iran is not only a story about Iran. By week 3 of a hypothetical ground campaign, the global economy is in a state of genuine crisis. The Strait of Hormuz has been fully or partially closed for weeks. Oil prices have reached levels not seen since any previous crisis in modern history. The cascading effects are moving through every connected economy on Earth. Fuel prices, food prices, manufacturing costs, shipping rates. South Korea, which has no domestic oil production and depends heavily on Gulf imports, is in economic freefall. European nations are scrambling to accelerate alternative energy sources while simultaneously managing the political pressure from populations that did not sign up for this war. China, which imports more Iranian oil than anyone else, and which has been watching the destruction of a major trading partner with a cold and calculating fury, is making decisions in Beijing that will have consequences for decades. And the United States military, magnificent and powerful as it is is beginning to show strain. The Atlantic Council's tracker of U.S. military assets lays out the picture with uncomfortable clarity. Of the 4 aircraft carriers available to the United States, one has been damaged by fire and is undergoing repairs. A second is still crossing the Atlantic. The AWACS surveillance fleet is stretched to nearly 70% deployment. B. 2 stealth bombers require an average of 119 maintenance hours after each bombing mission, meaning the aircraft used in the opening of Epic Fury have been cycling through maintenance at a pace that is consuming readiness. Tomahawk cruise missile inventories, which the United States has been drawing down for weeks, take time and industrial capacity to replenish. And every asset committed to this theater is an asset not available in the Pacific, where another nation, one with a nuclear arsenal, a blue water navy, and a long-term strategic plan, has been watching and waiting and taking notes. This is the scenario that American military planners call the two-ocean trap. If you fully commit to a ground war in Iran, you have to answer a question that has no comfortable answer. What happens if China decides that the window it has been waiting for, the window to move on Taiwan, has arrived? The United States has never faced this dilemma in its modern history. The closest historical precedent was the Korean War, which unfolded while American forces were still committed to the occupation of Japan and the defense of Western Europe. But the scale and sophistication of today's strategic competitors makes that comparison feel almost quaint. A ground war in Iran would be, by every honest military analysis, the most strategically demanding commitment the United States has undertaken since the Second World War. Not because Iran is stronger than the United States, but because of everything that comes with it: the terrain, the population, the proxies, the economy, the timeline, the political will required to sustain it, and the doors it leaves open everywhere else. So what does the end of this war look like? This is the hardest question of all, and the honest answer, the answer that the war games keep arriving at, is that there is no clean ending. There is no version of this scenario where American forces take Tehran in a week, the regime collapses, a friendly government takes over, and the troops come home. That version of events requires ignoring everything we know about Iranian history, Iranian society, Iranian military doctrine, and the nature of unconventional warfare. The realistic endings exist on a spectrum. On one end, a negotiated settlement, reached after months of brutal fighting and enormous casualties on all sides. That leaves Iran battered but intact. That leaves some version of an Islamic government in place because no viable alternative could hold the country together, and that cost the United States and its allies in blood, treasure, and global standing in ways that will reshape American politics for a generation. On the other end, a full, open-ended occupation of a country of 85 million people, with an active insurgency drawing on decades of asymmetric warfare doctrine, with external support flowing through Iraq and Lebanon and Yemen, consuming American resources for years or decades, without a definable moment of victory. Neither ending is what the opening press conference promised. This is not a statement about the intentions of the people who authorized this war. The intentions, as stated, were to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran, to stop the missile attacks on U.S. allies, to achieve regime change, and deliver freedom to the Iranian people who had been suffering under a brutal government. Those are real goals. Some of them are genuinely just. But the history of military intervention, from Napoleon in Spain to the British in Afghanistan to the Americans in Vietnam and Iraq, teaches the same lesson again and again in blood. The gap between the goals you enter a war with and the reality you encounter once you are inside it is where empires go to age quickly. Our Marine in the belly of that ship is real. Somewhere right now, there are young men and women in the United States military who are either moving toward Iran or preparing to. They are brave. They are professional. They are ready to do what they are asked. None of what follows from the decisions being made above them is their failure. It is the weight of strategy, the brutal mathematics of geography and politics and history, pressing down on individual courage. The question of whether to send them in is not a question about whether American soldiers can fight. They can. They always have. It is a question about what they are being sent into, what it will take to succeed, what success even looks like, and what the world on the other side of this decision will look like for the people who come after us. 47 years of American-Iranian conflict, From the CIA coup of 1953 that planted the seed, through the hostage crisis, through the tanker wars, through the proxy conflicts and the assassinations, and the nuclear negotiations that kept collapsing, have been building to this moment. Every step down this road has narrowed the options. Every miscalculation, on both sides, has made the next step more likely and less reversible. History does not offer do-overs. It offers consequences. The ground invasion of Iran, if it comes, will not be remembered as a chapter in American military history. It will be remembered as a turning point in world history. Not because America cannot fight, but because the world that comes out the other side will not look like the world that went in. Oil markets, nuclear proliferation, the US-China balance of power, the future of the Middle East, the meaning of American global leadership, all of it goes into the fire together. And what comes out, nobody can honestly say. The Roman general Crassus thought he understood the Persian frontier. He had money, he had legions, he had confidence. He rode east into the desert, and he never came back. Alexander the Great, the most brilliant military commander the ancient world ever produced, swept through Persia and called it victory. And within a decade, the empire he built from it was gone, dissolved back into the land for which it came. The land that is today called Iran has swallowed conquerors before. It has a long memory and a longer patience. Whatever decision gets made in the next 48 hours, in the next week, in the next month, those lessons are not going away. The echoes of what happens in the coming days will shape not just the next decade of history. They will shape the century. If you found this story as urgent as I do, if you believe that understanding history is the only honest way to make sense of the world we are living through right now, then subscribe to Echoes of Empires. Every day, we take the moments that are changing the world and give them the depth they deserve. Because the news tells you what happened. We tell you why it matters, where it came from, and what comes next. Hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment below with what you think the next move should be: ground invasion, diplomacy, or something else entirely. This conversation is one of the most important of our lifetimes. Let's have it together.